What is up, guys? Welcome to my review for Titans Season 1, Episode 5, titled Together. So, this episode is titled Together because at the end of the last episode, the Titans have finally come together, and in my opinion, this is the first episode of the show to really deserve the title of the show in general, which is Titans, because up until this point, it wasn't really Titans, but that makes sense because that's what this show has been building to up until this point. And in terms of the actual Titans together for the first time in this episode, the way that was handled in this episode particularly was fine, but I think the dynamics between all the characters can really have a lot of potential for the show. I think that the show is definitely missing a certain character, probably Cyborg, but I mean, for now, the dynamic between all the characters is pretty solid, and the dynamic between the powers and skill set of the characters is also really good as well on the show. The episode started with a whole sequence of all the Titans showing off their powers, except for Robin. It was Beast Boy, Raven, and Starfire showing off their powers. This is a really great way to showcase these characters' powers from what they have right now. All of them are limited on their powers. I mean, Starfire has not been able to fly yet, and she is only really able to use her powers in the day. Beast Boy can only really turn into a tiger, and then Raven doesn't really have control over her powers at all. So this season will most likely be about all these characters, including Robin, really learning how to use their skills or powers correctly and in the right way. And this sequence of them really showing their powers to each other and also showing their struggles to each other about their powers and what they can do with their powers, what they can't do with their powers, and also what they will be able to do in the future. And I thought this is a great way to do all of that. It also probably was a great way for them to bond and get to know each other better, because they don't really know much about each other on the show. So this is a great way to do that in a way that wasn't boring. Like if there was just a conversation between each character, which I'm sure they could make interesting, it would not have been as interesting as all characters showing off their powers and what they can and can't do, and then each character learning about each other. I think that just in general, this scene of all the Titans showing off their powers is a really great way to start the episode, a great way to show off their powers and what they can and can't do, and a great way for to make these characters know each other better, so that they can make a better and more believable team in this season. In general, I thought this beginning scene was a great scene. So this episode saw the return of the Nuclear family and the Titans facing off against the Nuclear family in a bunch of fight scenes, and in the fight scenes in general I thought were really good, especially the ones with Robin. I mean, Robin was incredibly badass in this episode. I think that Robin in general is in this show incredibly badass, and I think his costume is dope, but it sucks that in this show so far, this is technically really the second episode he's put on the costume. He was wearing it in the first episode, and in the second episode he wore it in flashbacks, and then in episode 3 and 4 he didn't wear them at all. So this is the second episode of the show in the present day that he wore the costume, which I really hope that from now on he wears it every episode, because it just makes him so much more badass, and it makes the show more exciting because of it. And in this episode really, for some reason, really built up to Robin putting on his costume again in front of the rest of the Titans, and I thought that build-up was great. And by the time he finally put on his costume for the first time in 4 episodes, it was a pretty epic moment. And then right after that, all the Titans showed off their powers again by fighting the Nuclear family. It wasn't Starfire, it was more Beast Boy and Raven. That was pretty awesome as well, like in the end where all the Titans were finally together, hence the title of the episode. That was an awesome moment. I honestly did not expect to get this excited over this show, just going off the trailers and everything we saw from the set photos. I was a little disappointed in what they were doing, but this episode and every episode really before this one, I'm actually really excited. I'm genuinely excited for this season, which is something I could not have said before the first episode came out. And in this episode, when the Titans finally came together, I realized that this show has huge potential to be a great TV show. It already is a pretty great TV show, but it has great potential to be a great superhero TV show, and the first real superhero team-up TV show, or the first real superhero team TV show, or at least live-action TV show, because obviously you have Justice League and Teen Titans and Young Justice, but this would be the first live-action one, and I think that for now it's doing really well, and I'm so excited. I'm genuinely excited for the rest of the season, because just seeing all the Titans together It was really awesome. I'm hoping that in future fight scenes they really do not hold back on the CGI, because in this one, Starfire didn't use her powers, and Beast Boy and Raven, they didn't really use their powers much. It didn't really hinder much from the episode, because the way they built everything up to the Titans coming together, and by the time they already did, even though it was only for a couple seconds, it was awesome. I'm just hoping that in future episodes they do not hold back with these guys' powers and the CGI around these powers, even though it probably is a little costly. I really hope that we see some awesome fight scenes with the Titans against some characters, and in this episode we had them facing off the nuclear family, and it was a bunch of awesome scenes. Another thing that happened in this episode was Dick and Cory actually hooked up, and I would say, I'm not going to talk about this for very long because this isn't typically something that I like to talk about in reviews, but all I'm going to say is that I think they rushed it a little bit. Like, compared to the Teen Titans animated show from the early 2000s, that show took the entirety of the show and the movie to get to those two getting together, and throughout the entire show they had this thing where they obviously both had a crush on each other, but they didn't actually resolve that to the movie, and I think they could have done something similar here, where it wouldn't last 5 whole seasons in a movie, but it could have lasted a couple episodes instead of like 5 minutes like it did in this episode. But that's really all I have to say. It's not a huge complaint or anything, but I think they could have waited a couple episodes longer to put these two characters together. So the next thing that happened in this episode, and the last thing really, is that Jason Todd appeared. Now, Jason Todd is a character that, first of all, I expected him to have a little bit more of a role in this episode, but I definitely also expected him to have a huge role in the next episode, because the next episode is titled Jason Todd. But I am just so excited to see him on the show, because in my opinion he is the most interesting Robin out of the 4, out of Dick, Jason, Tim, and Damian. I would say Jason is not my favorite Robin, but he is the most interesting Batman sidekick, because when he becomes Red Hood, he's a much more interesting character. So I'm really hoping they have a lot to bring to this character on the show. Maybe he can become Red Hood down the line. Maybe there will be a storyline where Robin and Batman in the background deal with the fact that he died and then he came back and is now Red Hood. That's something that I would love to see on the show. But as for the actual review portion of this recording, Jason Todd in this episode didn't really have a major role. He was really there to serve as a cliffhanger for the next episode, which I would say was a great way to get me excited for next week's episode. In conclusion, this episode was maybe the most exciting episode of Titans, because the Titans finally came together in a way that was pretty epic. Dick became Robin again, or he put on his Robin costume again, and Jason Todd debuted at the end. I thought this episode was incredibly exciting. There were some things I didn't like, some things that obviously I did, but in general I thought this was a very, very strong episode, so I'll give this episode a 9.5 out of 10. But let me know what you thought about the episode in the comments down below, and if you like this video, don't forget to leave a like, share, and subscribe, and thanks for watching.